central bank. And as we know, there's been a lot in the news in the last year about bank failures and is our money safe? A lot of people are wondering that question because the Treasury Department stepped in with the Federal Reserve and they bailed out banks, and a lot of speculation on if banks collapsed, more banks failed, would they do the same thing? Would they continue to insure depositors' money in the bank for over $250,000? And a lot of people are asking the question, can you trust central banks? Can you trust the Federal Reserve? So I flew out to Portland, Oregon to talk to bank historian John Maxfield. Who is John Maxfield on banks? Somebody who's very knowledgeable on the history of banking, and I think you'll be surprised at the conversation that we had. John, thanks so much for having me to your home here in Oregon. I love it. I appreciate it. I love your work, man. I'm excited to dive deep and pick your brain about the current state of the banking industry, and so much in the news right now, and get your opinion on the Federal Reserve and kind of what's going on. But for those that don't know who you are, explain, who's John Maxfield?
So let me start out by saying that, and I told you this off camera, but like, it means so much to me that you and your team flew out here with all that equipment and are sitting in my living room right now. It is so cool. That says so much about like what you value in life. And it's the same thing that I do, as we were talking about, like relationships and understanding where a relationship can start and where it can end. So I just wanted to say, like, on camera, that like, I appreciate very much that you guys are out here.
Yes, sir.
So who am I? The way I like to describe myself is that I'm a clown, like a janitor. You know what I mean? Because what I do is kind of hard to explain. But the essence of it is that I study banking. I'm a very serious student of banking. And I've studied kind of all the different verticals, the history, the analytical part, the behavioral stuff. And now I really focus my time on educating bank CEOs in the country. And so I host events. I do a little writing. Right now, as you know, I'm with this amazing videographer. We're traveling the country, creating this amazing content that we're going to kind of play in the banking field and kind of introduce this new way of communicating. So I guess the best way to sum it up is that I'm focused on studying banking and then sharing what I learn.
I know you went to law school, so that wasn't your path. But what's the fascination with the banking industry?
So ever since I was a kid, I've studied subjects. I've gone subject matter by subject matter. And what I'll do is I'll saturate the literature of the subject matter and learn everything I can about it. And then I'll reduce whatever that subject matter is to a simple underlying principle that is robust enough to cover everything that happens. And so I've done that with physics. I've done it with religious topics. I've done it with high altitude mountaineering. I've done it with maritime disasters, all sorts of stuff. And so when the financial crisis hit, which you experienced that in the real estate world, which was, I can only imagine, what I realized was that I didn't understand why these things happened. And so I just wanted to understand why it happened. And so at the time, I was working at a bookstore. I'd graduated. I did well in law school and all those things. But after that, I cashed in an investment, moved to Washington, D.C. My plan was just to read as many books as I could until my money ran out, and then I'd get a real job. And the financial crisis hit, and I said, well, here's the topic I'm going to study. And so I just started reading about banking, and what I thought would take 6 months to a year to do go to the same kind of exercise I go through ended up taking 12 years. And after 12 years, I kind of realized that there's something I was clearly missing. There's something that was wrong in the literature. Something was off. And so I've spent the past 2 to 3 years trying to figure out what that was and then fixing that.
Well, I know you said you've read about 500 or 600 books. I've seen your book collection. It's pretty massive. Now, let's talk about the banking industry, because, one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated to talk to you is because there's a lot going on right now. And, it's with what's happening with the Federal Reserve and how it relates to not just the economy in general, but what my business, right? The housing market. I've seen what appears to be so many lies, deception, false information, false reporting. And, so that is really my passion of trying, my audience, my clients, they rely on me to sort of flush it out, get to the bottom, try and figure out what's really going on, not what we're not hearing in this special agenda or special interest of mainstream media. So I want to talk about banking, and I have watched a couple of your podcasts, and, dating back to not that far off of the March 12th weekend. I think it was March 10th when SVB collapsed, right? It was a Friday. They scurried in and, rewrote FDIC policy essentially and bailed out this massive bank, and then several others failed as well. I mean, we had the
over that weekend.
Silicon Valley was the 10th, Signature was the 12th, First Republic May 1st, Heartland Tri-State Bank July 28th, Citizens Bank November 3rd, and then recently, we're seeing these New York banks and stocks tumbling, and what I see is we're on the verge of a crisis. But what I want to sort of dive in is that on a couple of the interviews that I watched of you talking about, and it was shortly after the March fallout, the question was to you, are we over? Is this, is the threat of banks going out, is it over? Have we seen the bottom of that? And you said yes. And I kind of want to know what's your opinion of banking right now, because since then, another 4 banks have collapsed. So, kind of fill us in. Has your opinion changed on, the threat that we're facing? Because a lot of people don't trust their money in the bank. I mean, that's why we're seeing these bank runs. So, if you can just kind of bring us up to speed on that and what's your opinion of it now?
Okay, I love this question. And I've not been asked this question, and I'm really glad you asked it. So let me say it like this. So I feel like I have a duty to the banking industry. I'm here to try to make a difference in this world, okay? I want to make a leverage difference. You know what I mean? I want to make as big of a difference as possible. And so where do you make a leverage difference? There's no better place in banking. Nothing's levered like banking, okay? And these things are built into the community. So if I want to make a difference, like if I can influence the banking industry, I can have a big difference in this world and helping people. The problem is that when you get to the point where I've gotten, and I don't want to toot my own horn, but like people listen to what I say about banks. Somebody like me cannot come out in the midst of crisis and say that things are getting worse or pick out a bank. A lot of times I'll get asked questions. Is this bank okay? Is that bank okay? Is this bank okay? I, under no circumstances, whatever I think about that institution, I, under no circumstances, can I say that I think that's going to bring a failure. Because that is not to say that it would be a guarantee that would be then a self-fulfilling prophecy. But there's a real chance in the midst of a crisis when they're asking for somebody like my opinion, like mine, and they know it's credible, that could be the end of that for the bank. And so you have to be really careful how you talk about this. And it's not because I'm trying to protect the banks. I'm not trying to protect the banks. I'm trying to protect us. Because like you have 100 banks that go down. We're gonna have ourselves a serious problem. So the answer to your question is, yeah, did I think that the crisis was over? No, I didn't think it was over at all. Okay, I didn't think it was over at all. And let me tell you why. If you go back through, there's 9 major banking crises in the history of the United States of America. Okay, if you look at every single one of them, and I'll show you the imagery upstairs, I have it. There's twin peaks on both of them. Okay, and I'm talking when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the number of bank failures as a percentage of the number of banks. You have twin peaks, these 2 peaks in each crisis. And you say, well, why do you have those twin peaks? And what are those all about, right? And this will get to your point about kind of changing the FDIC policy. What you see is that first failure is a market response to the over leverage and the overextension, right? So that's the market saying, banks, you went too far. We're going to draw you back in. The market draws them back in. Then what happens when the market draws them in? The policymakers, because the implication of when that happens with banks, you contract the money supply so much that then you put us into a situation where it's like we could go into a serious economic type of depression, right? And so what you see is the policymakers will respond. And they'll pass legislation. The regulators will enforce. They'll focus on something else in terms of the enforcement. And typically, what happens is the response to that policy change causes a second peak in failures. So all along, I've actually anticipated I wouldn't be surprised if there's a second peak because we've seen it every other time but one. Somebody like me, you cannot say. I can say it now because